What started as a calm political debate spiraled into national chaos. Live on air, when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett tried to ambush Karoline Leavitt with one of the most aggressive attacks ever seen on TV, Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she exposed a secret so explosive it left the entire panel speechless and Crockett completely unhinged. What Karoline revealed wasn't just political, it was personal. And once you hear it, you'll understand why millions are demanding accountability today. If you like bold stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Okay, let's get into it. It was supposed to be a civil conversation. That's what the producers promised Karoline off-air. Just a respectful discussion on values in American politics, they said. But when she walked onto that set, bright lights blaring, cameras rolling, and the smell of makeup and nerves hanging in the air, Karoline felt it in her gut. This wasn't a discussion. It was a setup. The program was being broadcast live to millions across the country. The kind of morning show that pretends to be balanced, but everyone watching knows where it leans. Seated across from her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, dressed sharp, voice ready, eyes cold. She hadn't come to talk. She'd come to destroy. The segment began innocently enough. The anchor, one of those grinning types who talks like they're defusing a bomb, turned to Karoline and asked, "Do you think faith still belongs in American politics?" Karoline leaned forward, her voice steady. "Not only does it belong, but without faith, our leaders have no moral compass." The founders understood this, and so do millions of Americans who pray every day not for power, but for peace and wisdom. But before she could finish, Crockett jumped in. "Oh, please," Jasmine scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Let's be honest. What you call faith is just a cover, a dog whistle. It's white Christian nationalism dressed up in Bible quotes." There was the attack. Blunt, accusatory, calculated. The studio froze. One of the co-hosts cleared his throat, unsure whether to intervene. But Karoline didn't blink. She simply tilted her head slightly, that calm defiance spreading across her face. She'd seen this playbook before. Accuse, dismiss, discredit. And if that didn't work, yell, shame, twist the narrative until truth itself seemed offensive. Karoline took a slow breath. She could have snapped back, could have gone for the jugular, but she had something far more devastating in her pocket. A document, a leak, a digital receipt of hypocrisy buried beneath months of political posturing. But not yet. Timing was everything. She looked directly at Jasmine Crockett and asked softly, "Are you saying that Americans who believe in God shouldn't be allowed to speak in public spaces or run for office?" Crockett rolled her eyes. "I'm saying your version of God has been weaponized. It's the same faith used to justify January 6th. There was again the smear. Link everything to the worst moment. Paint all believers with one brush." Karoline felt the tension rise, but not fear. This was exactly where she needed Jasmine to go. To overstep. To reveal the contempt. Karoline smiled. Just slightly. Because in less than 2 minutes, she was going to blow the lid off the entire conversation. Not with rhetoric. Not with spin. But with irrefutable evidence Jasmine Crockett hoped would never see the light of day. The trap had been set. Karoline had waited weeks for this moment. The leak had arrived in her inbox anonymously. The subject line read only, "You should see what Crockett says behind closed doors." Attached was a memo, real, raw, and stamped with digital fingerprints, tying it to a private strategy session between Jasmine Crockett and several progressive operatives. At first glance, it looked like routine campaign notes. But buried on page 3 was a phrase that made Karoline's blood run cold. Frame faith-based messaging as extremist rhetoric. Target religious women in red states. Discredit their credibility before the election year. Karoline read it 3 times. Then again, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It wasn't just a political strategy, it was a calculated assault on Christian voters, especially women. The very demographic Jasmine had claimed to protect. But Karoline knew the truth. Crockett didn't want to protect women of faith. She wanted to silence them. So she waited. She didn't rush to post it. She didn't send it to the press. No, she wanted the confrontation to happen in real time, with no spin, no staffers running interference. She wanted Jasmine to hang herself with her own hypocrisy. And now, the moment had come. Live on air, Jasmine continued her rant, ramping up the rhetoric. "You call it faith," she said with a scoff. "But let's not pretend like it hasn't been used to justify discrimination, racism, and patriarchy. The real threat to democracy is Christian supremacy masquerading as virtue." The host shifted uncomfortably. The control room scrambled. Someone whispered into an earpiece. The tension was real now, not just for viewers, but for the people running the show. Karoline waited for the perfect beat, then slowly reached into her folder. She didn't wave anything around. She didn't grandstand. She simply held up a single sheet of paper and said calmly, "Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to explain this memo your staff sent out to Democratic fundraisers last month, where you called for a direct campaign against women of faith in red states?" Jasmine blinked, confused for half a second, then defensive. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she shot back. But Karoline wasn't done. She leaned in. "This memo," she continued, holding it up again, "was authenticated by 3 cybersecurity experts. It includes your name, your digital signature, and specific fundraising targets based on shaming religious conservatives. You used phrases like erode trust in scripture-based messaging and delegitimize moral platforms before the narrative forms. This isn't just politics. This is planned bigotry." Boom. The set exploded. Figuratively, of course, but you could feel it in the air. The host stammered. A producer ran across the studio floor, whispering frantically. Jasmine's jaw clenched. For the first time, she had no script, no comeback, just rage. And Karoline? She was just getting started. It started with silence. That awful, buzzing silence that creeps in when someone realizes the cameras are still rolling, and they've been caught with nothing to say. Jasmine Crockett sat frozen for a moment, lips parted as if a sentence were loading, but no words came. Her carefully curated on-air persona, the composed congresswoman, the fierce defender of the left, was cracking, and the world was watching. Karoline sat still. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just waited, letting the moment stretch. Then it snapped. "This is fake," Jasmine barked, slapping the table. "You come on here with a prop and think that makes you some kind of hero? Anyone can print a memo. This is MAGA theater." Karoline didn't respond immediately. She knew better than to interrupt a fire. "Let burn." Jasmine's voice rose, her tone sharpened, her hands flying as she tried to claw back control of the narrative. "This is what you people do," she shouted, turning toward the host now. "You let these extremists lie, smear, and spin garbage on national TV and pretend it's journalism." But one of the anchors, clearly rattled, hesitated, then asked the obvious. "Congresswoman, are you saying the memo is fabricated? Are you denying authorship?" Jasmine hesitated, just long enough for everyone watching to notice. And that's when Karoline struck again, calm, lethal. "I brought the metadata with me," she said quietly. "Timestamps, IP address logs, and email headers from your campaign consultant's laptop. Your team tried to scrub it from the cloud, but they missed a backup on a shared drive. That's how it got to me. Would you like to see the full packet?" The anchor looked stunned. Jasmine's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're not allowed to access private data. That's illegal." Karoline shook her head. "Actually, it was shared by a whistleblower from inside your own campaign. They came to me because they were ashamed of how you talk about religious voters behind closed doors. That was it." Jasmine Crockett exploded. "You are a liar," she screamed, slamming her fist on the table so hard the mic clipped. "You self-righteous fraud. This is why no one takes you seriously. You show up here with your little cross and your Bible and your smug attitude like you're God's gift to America." Gasps echoed from off-camera, and Karoline didn't move, didn't blink. She simply looked down at the small silver cross around her neck, then back up at Jasmine with steel in her eyes. "This cross," she said softly, "represents everything you've tried to silence, and it's not going anywhere." Boom. Twitter would later call it the moment, the exact frame when Jasmine Crockett lost the room, and Karoline Leavitt claimed it. The meltdown clip would go viral before the show even ended. Staffers would scramble to mute the replay. Crockett's office would go dark for hours. But at that moment, one thing was certain: the battle wasn't over. The war had just begun. The meltdown wasn't just a moment. It was a signal. And within minutes, it set the country ablaze. The clip of Jasmine Crockett screaming, slamming her fist, and lashing out at Karoline Leavitt went viral on every platform: TikTok, X, Rumble, Facebook, Telegram. The full video was barely 5 minutes old before hashtags like #CrockettMeltdown and #CarolineExposedTheTruth began trending. Newsroom scrambled. Producers were split between outrage and panic. CNN cut to commercial early. MSNBC brought on a body language expert to try and spin the visuals. But none of it worked, because the footage didn't lie, and the public saw what they saw: a sitting congresswoman caught in a lie, unraveling under pressure, and attacking a woman for her faith on live TV. And then came the shift. At first, it was just whispers, comments under the video, saying things like, "I don't usually like Karoline, but she handled that like a pro. Crockett lost it. That wasn't leadership. That was hate. Why is faith considered dangerous now?" But within hours, the whispers turned into roars. Church leaders started speaking out. Not from megachurches or political platforms, but small-town pastors, Catholic laypeople, evangelical moms, even Jewish and Muslim voices who saw the bigger issue. This wasn't just about Karoline. It was about whether faith itself was allowed a voice in public life. One particularly viral response came from a retired African-American pastor in Birmingham, Alabama. His video was raw, filmed on a front porch with wind blowing through his gray hair. He held up a Bible and said, "They're not afraid of Karoline Leavitt. They're afraid of what she represents. Because if a young woman can speak truth with faith and grace, then their whole system starts to shake." That video was shared over 5 million times in 2 days. But the real surprise came from within the political left. A prominent Democratic strategist, speaking anonymously to Politico, admitted what others wouldn't say out loud. Jasmine went too far. She made it personal. When you scream at someone for wearing a cross, you're not attacking a political opponent. You're attacking a nation of believers. That's not strategy. That's suicide. Meanwhile, Karoline stayed quiet. For nearly 24 hours, she posted nothing, said nothing, gave no interviews. Let the storm rage while she stood still, an image of composure, confidence, and conviction. And when she finally did post, it was a single image: the cross necklace she wore during the debate, resting beside a dog-eared pocket constitution. The caption read, "They told me to take it off. I never will." The comments section exploded with support. Veterans, grandmothers, students, faith leaders, even some longtime skeptics who'd once brushed her off as too young, too brash, too political, were now seeing something different. Not a politician, a fighter, a symbol, a woman who stood her ground when every force around her tried to shake it. And as momentum surged, one thing became clear: Jasmine Crockett wasn't just losing control of the narrative, she was losing the country's trust. Humiliation is a powerful motivator, and Jasmine Crockett was humiliated. Not just in front of a studio audience, not just in front of political opponents, but in front of the entire nation. Her meltdown had become the punchline of the week, a symbol of progressive intolerance gone too far. And in Washington, D.C., wounded pride doesn't crawl away quietly. It retaliates. Within 48 hours, Crockett's office issued a formal ethics complaint against Karoline Leavitt. The claim? Deliberate spreading of fabricated documents, digital intrusion into private campaign data, and religious grandstanding unbecoming of public discourse. But what really stood out in the complaint was the final sentence. Ms. Leavitt's presence in political discourse represents a dangerous step toward theocratic intimidation. The message was clear. They weren't just trying to discredit Karoline. They were trying to banish her. Mainstream media outlets pounced on the filing. The usual suspects lined up to spin it. One MSNBC analyst called Karoline a dangerous blend of youthful arrogance and evangelical zealotry. A late-night host referred to her as Joan of Arc with Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, Crockett herself began making the rounds. giving controlled interviews to friendly hosts, painting herself as the victim of a right-wing smear campaign. But it wasn't working, because outside the Beltway bubble, real Americans were still rallying around Karoline. In a packed town hall in Missouri, a woman stood up, middle-aged, wearing a faded sweatshirt that read faith over fear. With tears in her eyes, she said into the mic, "My daughter stopped wearing her cross necklace to school because she was afraid." Karoline made her put it back on. Moments like that don't show up in polls. They don't get covered by the networks, but they shift the culture. And Karoline, she wasn't just surviving the onslaught. She was preparing a counteroffensive. 3 days after the complaint was filed, she stepped onto the steps of the Capitol with a crowd behind her. Pastors, veterans, small business owners, mothers with children in strollers. Dozens of them, all holding small wooden crosses in silent protest. Microphones gathered, cameras clicked, and Karoline spoke, without notes, without fear. "This isn't about me. It never was. This is about whether people of faith still have a voice in this country, or whether we get screamed at, mocked, and investigated for daring to speak the truth. If Jasmine Crockett thinks her complaint will make me back down, I have one answer for her. Not now, not ever." The press tried to shout questions. Karoline ignored them. She simply raised one hand, showing the cross around her neck, and then walked off. That moment would echo louder than any panel segment. Because while Crockett had tried to turn Karoline's silence into a scandal, Karoline had turned it into a statement of defiance. But behind the scenes, something darker was forming. Emails were being sent. Old contacts were being activated. Crockett's camp wasn't done, and what they did next would shake even seasoned political veterans. The smear campaign didn't begin with headlines. It began in shadows. 2 days after Karoline's Capitol Steps speech, obscure social media accounts started pushing a curious phrase, #Karoline Files. At first, it looked like nonsense, random posts, anonymous usernames, cryptic warnings like "you don't know the real Karoline Leavitt." But by nightfall, something more organized emerged. A thread appeared on Reddit, filled with old photos, out-of-context quotes, and alleged witnesses claiming Karoline had made harmful statements during her college years. None of it was verifiable. None of it had substance. But that wasn't the point. The goal wasn't to expose truth. The goal was to bury it. Within hours, the thread had been copied into articles on fringe blogs, then quoted in mid-tier outlets hungry for traffic. Then the mainstream picked it up, always with the same disclaimer, unverified but troubling. And just like that, the narrative flipped. Overnight, the question shifted from "did Jasmine Crockett target women of faith?" to "is Karoline Leavitt hiding something?" But Karoline knew the playbook. She'd read it cover to cover. First, they make you defend yourself. Then they isolate you. Then they paint your values as dangerous. What Crockett had tried to do in public, smear, mock, accuse, was now being industrialized behind the scenes. And this time, they were coming after everything: her job, her family, her faith. One article even targeted her parents, digging up their church's sermons to find evidence of extremism. Another tried to suggest that Karoline's refusal to publicly denounce certain conservative voices made her complicit in hate. It was relentless, coordinated, funded, and it was working. Some moderate allies began to distance themselves. A few conservative pundits played it safe, saying things like, "I support Karoline, but maybe it's time for her to step back and reflect." Donors hesitated. Event invites dried up. Even her press secretary began receiving anonymous threats. Still, Karoline stayed quiet until the next morning, when she walked into a church in North Carolina to speak at a youth leadership summit. Cameras followed her in. Reporters surrounded the building. The media expected her to play defense. She didn't. Instead, Karoline stepped up to the pulpit and addressed the smear campaign head-on. "They're not after me because I did something wrong. They're after me because I did something right. Because I reminded America that faith is not a crime, that truth isn't hate speech, and that women who kneel before God will never bow before government." The room erupted. Even as the pressure mounted, even as political insiders whispered about collateral damage, Karoline stood taller. The fire didn't consume her. It forged her. But the most shocking moment had yet to come. Because just as the smear machine reached its peak, a whistleblower from inside Jasmine Crockett's own inner circle came forward. And what they revealed would not only clear Karoline's name, but put Jasmine in legal jeopardy. The final blow didn't come from Karoline. It came from inside Jasmine Crockett's own war room. Late on a Thursday night, an encrypted message was delivered to an independent journalist known for breaking politically inconvenient stories, left, right, or otherwise. The source claimed to be a junior communications staffer for Crockett's re-election campaign. What they provided wasn't just scandalous, it was evidence. Emails, audio recordings, internal messages from campaign group chats. Every bit of it confirmed what Karoline had implied weeks earlier. The smear campaign against her wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. In one email, dated 2 days after the infamous live TV meltdown, a senior Crockett advisor wrote, "We need to turn the heat on Leavitt. Get her talking about herself instead of faith. Dig into her past. Even if it's weak, flood the zone. Push the memo as fake. We can make her look like a fringe nut." But that wasn't the worst of it. One audio clip, recorded in a private Zoom strategy call, captured Jasmine Crockett herself speaking clearly. She wants a fight? Fine. Let's drown her in dirt. Make her radioactive. These people worship her now, but once we connect her to the right buzzwords, extremist, liar, conspiracy, they'll back off. We don't need truth. We need noise. That sentence would appear in headlines around the world. The whistleblower, who later identified herself as a 24-year-old media coordinator named Riley, said she couldn't stomach the hypocrisy any longer. "I signed up to fight for justice," she said in a video statement, "not to help powerful people destroy someone because they wear a cross on TV." Within hours, the entire narrative collapsed. Karoline's team released a full dossier to the press, time-stamped, verified, watermarked by a third-party digital chain of custody firm. Even liberal journalists admitted the evidence was airtight. The smear campaign was exposed for what it was, a desperate political hit job coordinated at the highest levels of Crockett's inner circle. Congressional leaders called for an ethics investigation. A major legal watchdog group filed a formal complaint to the FEC, citing abuse of campaign funds in the misinformation effort. Crockett canceled her upcoming media appearances. Her team went silent. By the weekend, multiple staffers had resigned. A reporter outside Crockett's D.C. office caught one of them leaving in tears, muttering, "This went way too far." And Karoline? She said almost nothing. Her only statement was a short video filmed in a small, quiet chapel. No lights, no crew, just Karoline, seated in a pew, holding a folded copy of the Constitution. "I didn't win anything," she said. "The truth did. And no matter what they say about us, our faith, our families, our country, we don't back down. We speak. We pray. We stand. That's how the light wins." That clip became her most watched video ever. What began as a trap had become a testimony. What was meant to silence her only amplified her voice. And what Jasmine Crockett unleashed that morning on live TV unwound her own political future. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you will never miss a video again.